Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Nick plays a dress down on Amy's turn. In response, Amy targets her Nadu 2 times with some ability. During the end step, after Nick sacrifices dress down, Amy targets her Nadu again. Does the Nadu ability trigger? So let's start out with some discussion of the situation from a rules perspective. After dress down is in play, there are going to be 2 continuous effects that apply to all Amy's creatures. The one from Nadu wants to give them an ability, and the one from dress down wants to take all of their abilities away. Both of these apply in layer 6, but because applying dress down's effect first changes whether the Nadu effect exists, we say that Nadu's effect depends on dress down's, and for that reason dress down will always apply first, regardless of the order that these 2 permanents entered the battlefield. Therefore, after the dress down enters, none of Amy's creatures will have the Nadu ability. After dress down leaves the battlefield, Nadu will resume giving Amy's creatures its ability. But it's not obvious whether Nadu is giving those creatures a new instance of the same ability, in which case the twice per turn cap would be reset, or whether the creatures are just regaining the same instance of that ability that they had formerly, in which case it would not. As it turns out, there's no rule that directly covers this scenario, but we do have an official answer. Impatient people should know that I put the answers to my daily rulings in the description. Just make sure you leave a like and a comment so the algorithm doesn't punish me too hard. Now, I want to make sure that everybody understands exactly what the core problematic case is. There are a lot of similar situations that do have a definitive answer, and to really get a good handle on this question, it's important to appreciate what makes this one a little bit different. It's kind of subtle, so I'll build up to the situation from the original problem statement gradually. First of all, let's say that you have 2 Nadus in play, because you have a mirror gallery or something like that. All of your creatures would then have 2 instances of the Nadu ability, one from each of them. Each instance of this ability would function independently, meaning that, for instance, each one would have a separate counter for the twice per turn limit, and if one Nadu was removed, all the creatures would lose its ability but retain the other one, with no effect on the twice per turn limit, regardless of how many times either ability had triggered that turn. Next step up in difficulty, let's say that you had 1 Nadu in play and then you cast a second one. When the legend rule kicks in, you choose to keep the one that you just played. In that case, your twice per turn limits would all reset. This is literally the exact same scenario as the previous example, just with a different explanation for why one of the Nadus left the battlefield. If you instead kept the Nadu that was originally on the battlefield, then that would have no effect on the twice per turn limit because all your creatures would still have the same instance of the Nadu ability that they had originally. Well, what about if you did the exact same thing, except that you didn't have both Nadus out at the same time? You just had one, and then the first one died, and then after that you played a second one. We're starting to get a little bit more interesting here. There's no specific rule that says this, but common sense dictates that a different source would imply that your creatures have a different instance of the Nadu ability, even though they both have the exact same text. There is an official ruling in the Gatherer that backs this view up, so I'm comfortable calling this one correct without any other qualifiers, even if there might not be any specific rule in the CR that says this is right. Okay, spicing things up yet again, let's say that you have 1 Nadu and you cast a flicker on it. When the Nadu returns to the battlefield, it's considered a brand new object with no connection to its previous self. Therefore, the answer to this scenario would be exactly the same as the previous one, even though there's no point in time where your creatures had 2 instances of the Nadu ability, and indeed there was a brief time during the resolution of that flicker where they just had no abilities from Nadu at all. Now, let's focus on the dress down aspect instead for a little bit. If you had a homicide investigator that had already triggered and then you played a dress down, the homicide investigator would not trigger even if another creature dies after the dress down is sacrificed that turn. This is because it still has the same ability as before, and unlike permanents, there's no rule that says that if an ability leaves and comes back, it counts as a new ability. Thus far, all of the rulings that we've discussed have answers that are adequately supported by the CR or at least by relevant case law. But let's take a look at what makes the one described in the original problem statement unique. Nadu is unlike Homicide Investigator in that the ability that lets you reveal the top card of your library is not inherently part of Nadu. Rather, there's an ability that's actually printed on Nadu, which gives that ability to all your creatures. If the origin ability is somehow interrupted, it's unclear whether it will grant the same triggered ability afterwards or a different one. Now, I mentioned that some rulings don't come from the CR, but from case law. In other words, from looking at how similar situations are handled and using that to inform what the philosophy surrounding those kind of rulings should be. and then using that philosophy that we developed to guide us to an answer. This process may seem somewhat strange to Magic players because we don't need to rely on it very often, but many other games make much greater use of this kind of ruling. Unfortunately, case law isn't very helpful for us here because it doesn't paint a clear picture of what the answer should be. For example, last month I had a video where I talked about how Agatha's Soul Cauldron and Shifting Woodland interact. And a key part of that ruling was the point that if you gain, lose, and then regain the same set of linked abilities, then the new instance of those abilities will not be linked to any other ones, including ones that the permanent may have had in the past. This is not conclusive for this ruling because there aren't any linked abilities in the Nadu case, but it does point to the idea that the situation in the original problem statement should reset the cap. On the other hand, if you take a look at the section on counters, counters with the same name are fungible, which means that any individual instance of a +1/+1 counter works the same as any other, which by that logic, it seems like the abilities should be the same. Although I think that if you took a +1/+1 counter off a creature and put another one on it, most people probably wouldn't say that it was the same +1/+1 counter, which kind of points in the opposite direction. Now, a lot of the time, looking at things this way can lead to a clear philosophy that the rules team has tried to uniformly implement across many game concepts, but as you can see, it's a little iffier here. In cases like this, another thing that can help is sometimes Wizards will see the situation and issue an official ruling. Sometimes this will be in the release notes for one of the affected cards, which are compiled together into gatherer rulings, but a lot of the time it will happen after the set is released, and those rulings are typically communicated via the personal Twitter account of the rules manager or another authorized internet representative. I kind of wish I was making this up, but that's how it is. I have no idea why these official rulings can't be promulgated through a more official channel, such as, I don't know, the Wizards website, but the fact is a lot of official Magic rulings can be found on various people's Twitter accounts. And that is exactly what happened here. I've linked the relevant tweet in the description, but the official answer is that after the dress down leaves the battlefield, the Nadu abilities that your creatures have are considered to be the same as the ones that they had before the dress down was in play. In other words, the twice per turn cap is not reset. Using the same reasoning, we can extrapolate that the answer would be the same in a case where, for example, the Nadu player lost control of Nadu for some amount of time and then regained control of it, e.g. from a threaten effect. The official ruling from that tweet that I mentioned earlier does not apply specifically to that scenario, but applying the case law principle I mentioned earlier, I'm comfortable enough to call that ruling correct here. For now, I'll close out with my thoughts on what the answer should be and what we might see change in the rules in order to address this. Honestly, when I was thinking about this situation, I waffled back and forth a few times regarding what I felt the most intuitive answer would be, and I ended up agreeing with what the official answer was, but the fact that it was so close was kind of a little bit unsettling. Now, the official ruling that we have is enough to answer this question, as well as some similar ones with cards, for example, Tyvar the Bellicose, but to be really satisfying, I'd like to see something written in the comprehensive rules that rigorously defines what it means for an ability to be the same. That way we wouldn't have to rely on a Twitter ruling, especially since more and more abilities are being printed with a once or X times per turn rider. And I can see this being an important thing to have set in the future. Unfortunately, this is not as trivial of an ask as it sounds, so I expect that we might have to wait a while to see this, if we even get to see it at all. To see what I mean, let's consider this card, Well Rested. If you untap the creature and then managed to attach Well Rested to a different creature and then moved it back to the original one and untapped it again, would you get another Well Rested trigger? Well, based on what we said earlier with Nadu, the answer seems like it would be no, but it does seem like we're giving this creature a new instance of the ability again, right? So it kind of feels like maybe you should get another trigger. A lot of people that I talked to thought that changing an ability's timestamp should be sufficient to change its identity, but Bound by Moonsilver gets a new timestamp anytime it changes what it's attached to, so that would be very problematic to resolve if we wanted to bring timestamps into this. Copy effects are another potential source of problems. Like if my Nadu became a copy of another Nadu, would that mean that everything was now getting a different instance of its ability? Based on the official ruling we have, it seems like the answer should be yes, but then after that copy effect wears off, we would revert to having the original instance of that ability again. But this is kind of weird because the twice per turn counter is changing even though there's no change in what abilities the creatures actually have. And I still haven't come up with a solution I feel entirely satisfied with, but I think that if an object gives an ability to a second object, then the abilities on the second object have the same identity as long as both objects are the same and there's no copy effects that have started to apply on the object granting the ability. I feel like there might be some corner cases that still don't work intuitively here, but I think that's to be expected once we get that deep into things. Definitely let me know if you have a clever solution to this issue in the comments. That's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.